everybody. I'm so glad y'all are here. And I'm a writer, and I've been writing about neurodiversity since the first book that really sold on a national scale that had neurodiversity in the title, and that goes back to the early aughts. And I'm going to be reading today from a book called The Devil's Castle, and I put the publishing information in chat. Sales of the book, of course, are highly appreciated. I have to say, this is a book where it took me about 3 times as much to write it as it got back in advance because I did so much traveling, particularly to Germany, and did a lot of research into the German eugenics program and how inspired that was by the United States. But that's not mostly what I'm going to be talking about today. What I'm going to be talking about today is how much work I do in the area of neuroscience and how many neuroscientists to me are offering a kind of humility, a kind of wonder in the face of the mystery of consciousness that psychiatry is completely lacking. So I'm seeing neuroscience as kind of this wonderful, I think, corrective to so much of what we think, especially in the era of biological medicine, biological psychiatry, and the DSM. So I'm going to be doing some reading from the book and some just talking about the book. And I'm just going to plunge right in. So I really discovered that what I found was lacking in contemporary psychiatry, I found in some of the amazing conversations happening in today's neuroscience. And I have to say that as a person who is extremely bad at doing more than one thing at a time, if you have questions, I would love to answer them, but maybe Roger could look out for hand raises
Sure,
because I won't be monitoring the chat.
absolutely. And what I'll
Yeah.
also add is if you want your comment read out loud, just lead it with all caps read, and I'll make sure that gets read out loud. And just a little housekeeping item. If you're not talking, just please make sure that your mic is on mute. And I think that's pretty much it.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to the 1990s, which were called by the president we had at the time the decade of the brain, because we had just invented functional MRIs, a test that actually lets you watch people as they think. It measures the oxygen that they're using. And it started a wave of enthusiasm about how much this would mean for psychiatry and for understanding consciousness, which has been called since the 90s, starting with a philosopher named David Chalmers, the hard problem, because we don't understand it. We don't understand what thinking is. We don't understand how our mind does what it does, how it can have this inner narration and inner set of concepts. So in a wave of optimism, a neuroscientist named Christoph Koch in 1998 made a bet with David Chalmers that in 25 years, because of all this brain imaging, the hard problem of consciousness would be solved. We would know what it is. We would know how it happens. In 2023, Christoph Koch lost the bet publicly, actually on a stage at a conference, and gave David Chalmers a case or a bottle, I don't know what, of very expensive wine, admitting that he had lost. So on the one hand, we have neuroscience, which stresses mystery, the wonder, the great wonder and the great strangeness, as one writer called it, of consciousness. And on the other hand, we have contemporary psychiatry, which stresses checklists of symptoms, neurotransmitter theory that one after another have been disproven, and just lots and lots of medication. And so in my book, The Devil's Castle, talking to neuroscientists, researching how we got to the disease model, which is really not based on evidence. It was based on contingent things like what insurance companies wanted to pay for. And I also studied the works of people I call mind pioneers, one of whom was a German Nazi victim. She was not sterilized. She was sterilized. She wasn't killed, named Dorothea Buck. And she actually developed her own method for dealing with mental distress, whether it be depression or psychosis. And I'm kind of proposing a new framework for understanding and valuing mental diversity. I call it amor mentis, or love of the mind. We don't have a mind positive culture. We have a mind suspicious culture. We actually have kind of a mind is under attack culture. And I want everybody to get a little involved in this in the beginning, because I think I'm going to weave back around to how diverse thought really is. What's going on in your head right now is amazing. We can explain quantum tunneling and black holes. We can't explain that yet. So, and because some of my research is actually asking people how their minds work, I want everybody to take I'm only going to give you about a minute, because this is based on something the actor Rainn Wilson does, that he calls a soul scribble, but I'm going to give you 60 seconds to do a mind scribble. And I want you to try to draw how your mind works. Not like in the sense that if you're thinking about a cat, you're going to draw a cat, but just a sense of what goes on in there. And if it's just a great big weavy mess, that's totally fine. So we're going to do that. I'm going to do it too. And then we're going to come back around and come back to that a little bit later. You too, Roger. Okay, just kind of keep that in mind. So I don't know if any of you were in my last talk here, but I'm going to have to revisit just a couple of things, and then I'm going to go somewhere very different with them. So if you were, bear with me. This is where we are at using that biological disease model that started in the US that really took ascendancy around 1980. We have unprecedented levels of psychiatric misery. And these have risen in tandem with unprecedented levels of people in psychiatric treatment and on meds. And while we've reached out to all these different rationales for this, this happened long before the pandemic. It actually started happening around the year 2000. So even long before social media was the force that is now. We also live in a culture where the neurodivergent die at levels they should not be dying. Someone diagnosed with a major mental disorder, like me, I'm bipolar, actually have a life expectancy 20 to 30 years shorter than those who aren't so diagnosed. Part of that lies in how they're medicated, but there also is really a remarkable number of police shootings of the neurodivergent. Long records of police shootings and very traumatic arrests of autistics. Victor Perez in Idaho, Matthew Rushin in Virginia, the list really goes on. And while science would normally look pretty dimly at a cure that is thrown out in greater numbers at a problem that gets worse, we don't in the area of the mind. We kind of keep doing the same things. And treatment is still following those biological lines that began in the 1980s, which is 15 or 20 minutes to a diagnosis, symptom lists, and unfortunately, too often, prescriptions. I'm not anti-med. I'm anti the degree to which they're used and the low degree to which they're tested. So how did we get here? In the late 1970s, a group of psychiatrists who called themselves neo-Kraepelinians banded together to overcome what they saw as the weakness of psychological theory. They named themselves for Emil Kraepelin, a German doctor they admired. And this fact is kind of astonishing to me because Kraepelin actually taught the worst of the Nazi doctors. He was extremely anti-Semitic. He believed Jews were prone to psychopathy. And he believed that the work of a psychiatrist was less to heal patients than to serve his society and segregate and prevent from reproducing the people who he felt shouldn't be reproducing. He also believed that psychology was messy and hard to figure out, and that basically bad brain structure or bad brain processes caused pretty much everything that he saw as a psychiatrist. He felt like if you had lost a job and became depressed, you lost your job due to the fault in your brain that caused the depression, not that depression was caused by a life circumstance. He felt like life circumstances were simply created by the bad brain biology you were born with. So the people who, like him, wanted to kind of eliminate psychotherapy and psychology and get back to just saying it's biology, the brain of someone in depression is simply a sick brain and we have to fix it, came out with, they took a tiny book that was mostly used in asylums and was 100 pages and spiral bound, and remade it as the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Their revision was the DSM-3. We're now at the 5. It's both a medical philosophy and the kind of pumping heart of our system. Diagnosis requires a DSM label, and whether your doctor wants to or not, they're going to have to give that label to an insurance company in order to get reimbursed. The latest edition of the DSM, the 5, has 600 some odd categories, one of which is caffeine-induced sleep disorder, which I have to say many of us succumb to, especially when that caffeine comes late in the day. But there you have it. So we are really very much, and I think Roger would really agree with me here, stuck with this document that in many ways is kind of ridiculous and was created under these conditions of not the evidence is that mental illness is biological, but we want to prove that mental illness is biological. And so by golly, we're going to do it. To fit mental states and traits more firmly in the category of disease, the DSM lists disorders with onset and disease course kind of language, although much of it is still false. It lists schizophrenia as chronic and degenerative, when many schizophrenics will never have a second episode. Some of the symptoms are ludicrous. One sign of mania for bipolar disorder is increased activity towards a goal. And there's 7 possible symptoms, and 3 of which would get the bearer a diagnosis. The other 2 can be less sleeping less, and having flights of ideas. So you could be diagnosed with a major disorder and put on an antipsychotic for 3 symptoms that in and of themselves no one would consider particularly unusual or harmful. And in 1984, one of the neo-𝘋𝘦𝘔, as they call themselves, a woman named Nancy Andreasen, published a book called The Broken Brain, The Biological Revolution in Psychiatry. And The Broken Brain is one of those books that you know it even if you don't know it. It was actually a really big hit. It sold really widely to the general populace and basically sold biological psychiatry to the country. Andreasen called herself a neuropsychiatrist. She was mostly interested in brain function and had become kind of a spokesperson for that movement. It was the book that, and I mean, even the title, Broken Brain, is stigmatizing and hysterical. And if you pause for a minute to think that mind care is based on the idea that many brains are simply broken, you can see where our problems lie. She took up what 𝘋𝘦 said, that mental illness is mostly biological due to defective structures and processes, and she highlighted neurotransmitters. Although in 2022, a meta-analysis came out that demonstrated pretty much beyond doubt that the connection between serotonin and depression is just not there. That thousands of people have tried to prove it. You can't. There may be a connection. Serotonin is definitely involved in mood. We know that psychedelic drugs affect the serotonin system, but we just don't know. We don't know how these things work. And certainly there are people, it's a small number, but there's a statistically significant number of people who do respond well to the antidepressants that work the serotonin system, or we think they do. We just don't understand why. It's still extremely unclear. So this book kind of sold that to the general public, and we've kind of accepted it ever since. And that 2022 meta-analysis, since it made it to CNN, it made it to Psychology Today, it made it to all the major media, the New York Times, people were writing me like every day saying, what happened? Why have I been taking this? Have I been conned? And my answer was no. These drugs do something statistically significant. We just don't know what it is precisely. And one of the things that Nancy Andreasen really stressed that she got from her mentor 𝘋𝘦 was that your life does not affect your mood. Your mood is caused by your brain processes, which in many cases are sick and faulty. And if your life is messed up, it's because your brain is messed up and not the reverse. So she really eliminated from psychiatry the idea that life circumstance could cause you stress, anxiety, or depression, and simply said, no, your bad brain is causing those things to happen. You just don't realize it. And I invite everybody to stop for a minute and think about whether that makes any sense to you. If you've lost a loved one, if you've lost a job, if you've experienced even the stress of our, what we're going through in our country right now, that those things are not what's troubling you. I think it's pretty counterintuitive to almost everybody. But Andreasen presented this and said that disturbed minds could then be treated like any other diseased organ. The DSM has never paid super close attention to autism. The neo-Kraepelinians never came up with a sort of magic bullet. It's caused by this neurotransmitter theory of autism. So they kind of left it somewhere between the old theory of refrigerator moms and the newer theories of broken brains. In the DSM, autism is described as a childhood onset developmental deficit. It's listed as a neurodevelopmental disorder. And the fact that it wasn't addressed in neurotransmitter theory is one of the reasons it's kind of been open for an RFK Jr. to come along and start saying vaccines and circumcision and all these other things. His thinking is definitely very based on DSM thinking. It's very broken brain based. The idea that we need to identify the outside agents causing problems, causing this wonderful neuronormal mind, the pinnacle of cognitive development that we all should have, not to develop. The DSM also suggests that autism will almost always be tied to intellectual disability. So we're doing all this dancing rather than acknowledge what the neuroscientists are acknowledging, that we really don't understand consciousness itself in any meaningful way. So I set out in writing this book to figure out a better way to approach mind care. It seems to me that the fact that we are so influenced by the Emil Kraepelins and Hans Asperger's of the world is pretty sad. Asperger also was a German Nazi sympathizer who put children into the euthanasia system to be killed. He did not believe what he called severely autistic children should survive, and he sent them to a killing center called 𝘛𝘩𝘕. I know that we've kind of started erasing Asperger as we should. We have not gotten rid of Kraepelin. But I think to pretend that we can use their systems without embracing their ideology is pretty unrealistic. Kraepelin's biologically based, symptom and disease category based approach to psychiatry was designed not to help people, but to assign people value and to allocate resources. So I came to Dorothea Buck and another German who goes back mostly to the 1800s named Paul Schreber, who was institutionalized. He was a judge. He was institutionalized for life, and he actually litigated his own release, serving as his own attorney, and left behind these incredible documents where he argued his case. And I call him the greatest advocate we've ever had for defense of the neurodivergent. I mean, the man was a genius, and his pleadings actually changed German law and introduced several new concepts into German law. So they were kind of my my buffers, my good examples. So I'm going to read a little bit from the book now, which is about neuroscience and about kind of how I'm trying to unite these things. And please do feel free to ask questions. But roses and moving walls, and these are things I have experienced. I once saw roses hanging in the sky, in the air over my head, and felt the walls moving. But roses and moving walls aren't the strangest thing. That any mind exists is the strangest thing. Consciousness is a phenomenon so unlikely and unexplained, it's called the hard problem. The problem of why subjective experience exists, why there's something it feels like to be you. Opinionated, voice in the head, unified into meanness, you. Scans can show the brain responding to color in one place and sound in another. They don't show how a flute becomes a unified object, or how the owner of the brain might come to hold opinions about its music. More and more sophisticated brain imaging only makes the hard problem harder. It provides wonderful information which doesn't answer the most obvious question. Neuroscience and the study of consciousness have a reverence for the mind, for what consciousness is and does. The great wonder and great strangeness, in the words of New Scientist. That reverence has grown with the growth in research and the growth in rich and impossible questions. Some brain researchers consider consciousness a fundamental universal force, like gravity, a property held as potential by all matter. Consciousness is what neuroscientist Emil Seth, author of Being You, A New Science of Consciousness, calls a controlled hallucination, a vision produced by an organ responding to often incoherent sensory information with guesswork. What we call reality is what Seth calls a dance of prediction and correction, a highly individual interpretation aiming at the real but never identical to it. The notion that we each make our own reality and can't get to the truth might seem off-putting, but Being You was a bestseller, and Seth's TED Talk, Your Brain Hallucinates Your Conscious Reality, has had almost 15 million views. Mental illness really means consciousness illness, and given what we know about consciousness, the term makes no sense. No one can define out of touch with reality when no one knows what the thing being touched is. I want to explore what mind care can look like with reverence. I'll call this amor mentis, love of the mind. For Dorothea Buck, the mind is infinitely playful and meaning-making. With neurodivergent states, one way the psyche speaks to itself. For Paul Schreber, neurodivergent states apprehend the larger cosmic and supernatural forces that surround him. Albert Einstein said there are only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle. Schreber, in whose book the word miracle appears almost 400 times, chooses the latter. And it's really remarkable. One of Dorothea Buck's so-called psychotic visions, which She had, at the age of 19, she ran to her parents and said, "You have to help me with this. I've seen what Hitler's war is going to be, and it's going to be monstrous." And they said, "No, no, no. That's not likely to happen." And she went to her family friend, her choir director, and said, "You have to help me with this. We all have to talk to Hitler. His war is going to be monstrous." And the family friend said, "No, no, no." And she ended up getting taken to a doctor and medicated. And of course, in 1936, she was one of the only people seeing what actually was coming with Hitler's war. And Schreber didn't have any visions that were that tied to reality, I guess. But he experienced everything that happened around him as very miraculous, very wondrous, in a way that I think is really beautiful. And I think most of us would choose to live that way if we could. Is it not all miraculous and wondrous in a certain way? In madness, someone's consciousness has come to a point where it either bothers the holder of it or someone else has become bothered by it. If it's the holder that's bothered, there's work to do. It should always be work that tells the owner of that consciousness to value and not to fear their mind. The madness of fearing madness, the panic of believing the mind is going, is very real. Few people are taught to trust their consciousness, this great gift, the one that makes all other gifts possible. And when Dorothea Buck did her trialogue, the seminars that she did to work with people experiencing mental distress, one of the great gifts they gave people was simply to teach them self-acceptance, rather than the sense of panic that I think we're imbued with since an early age, this terrible fear that somehow the mind could be going, that we can't control it, that the mind is subject to the invasion of outside forces that can harm it, rather than giving them a mind positive perspective. Psychologist Lisa Cosgrove and journalist Robert Whitaker write that our culture has allowed psychiatry to become a philosophy as much as it is a medicine, a philosophy of the normal that's a very constricted space. They call it an impoverished philosophy of being. It's a philosophy that medicalizes the normal, the spiritual, the simply human. Where I taught, students sometimes told me they worried about going crazy, not because of unhappiness, but because they had mental experiences that they considered strange. Even hallucinations like hearing voices are common and affect between 10 and 20% of the population at some time. Sigmund Freud heard voices and found the phenomenon not sick, but interesting. Our current world has little room for Shakespeare's the lunatic, the lover, and the poet, who are of imagination all compact. No one wants their lunatics near their lovers. Movements like Mad Pride and the Hearing Voices movement have changed lives by offering amor mentis. Critiques of biological psychiatry exist within and without the profession. Psychiatry contains good people who want to heal. But treatment still follows the biological lines that began in the 1980s. 20 minutes or so to diagnosis, checking off symptoms from a list, then writing a prescription. This is necessary for insurance reimbursement, for the sanity industrial complex. Few doctors and fewer patients get educated in the difficulty of going off psych meds and the problems like anxiety and depression caused by med withdrawal. So prescriptions often become for life. If what Buck called conversation happens, it's generally in the office of a therapist whose presence requires money or health insurance, and who doesn't interact with the prescribing doctor. Without reverence for the mind, medicine will continue to fall into the traps of its history. I understand healing in the sense that one integrates one's psychosis experiences and no longer has to split them off from oneself or repress them, Buck wrote in a letter. By integration, she meant living in wholeness, rather than in a condition she described as unable to fulfill my profession or my education with concentration. By this standard, and not medicine's, Buck was healed. Each individual human is their own beautiful universe, as Anil Seth puts it. And he and I actually became friends. I first interviewed him for a Psychology Today column I was writing, and we kind of hit it off. He's just fascinating. And I love to learn about these universes. When I wrote my book, A Mind Apart, I began a practice I continue, asking people how they think. Not what, but how. In what way do they actually put thought together? One person tells me they have a mental elevator, stopping at different floors for different subjects. More than one person said they can only think in dialogue, using real or imagined people as partners. One man keeps a file cabinet of everyone he knows, pulling thoughts of people out of the cabinet like cards. Many told me they get what one man called looks of concern from medical people if they describe their inner worlds. Like my students, they worry their mental content, though they consider it very natural, might on its own indicate they're ill. So I'm not reading from the book anymore. I'm going to come back to neuroscience a bit. One of the things Anil Seth told me that really for me was very impactful was that we all are raised, we all are very indoctrinated to think that there's a monoculture of the mind. Like I said, that that neuronormative mind we're all supposed to have without these invading agents. But Seth actually told me that there's astonishing diversity. And I love that here at CASY, we're taking some great first steps in recognizing that diversity. Anil Seth has kind of turned his research to what he calls perceptual diversity. And obviously, the brain is an organ locked in a dark shell and responding to streams of often pretty incoherent sensory information with, as Seth puts it, its best guesses. It feels as if we interact directly with the world, but actually our brains are interacting with sensory signals. And the parts of our bodies in direct contact with the physical world aren't the ones that think. My favorite color is blue. My retinas could care less, as far as I know. So perception is kind of like playing telephone. We're trying to create coherence out of messages that come to us whispering through a string of intermediaries. And the world we experience is what Seth calls a dance of perception and correction. We predict what input means, but if the input is that sofa cushion, or what looks like a sofa cushion is really my cat, I'm going to get a little swat and revise my guess. And another thing Seth said that I think is very impactful, next time you go for a walk by the sea or through a town, try to imagine all the unique, personalized inner universes in the minds of all the people around you. There isn't just one beautiful world out there. There are many. Seth in his Being You calls consciousness a controlled hallucination. And we build our worlds and our social protection on whether our hallucinations are roughly similar. We all need to agree the sky is blue, and even if enough people agree that lizard people run the government, it might be weird, but it's not any longer diagnosable. As I always say, you just don't want to be the first one talking about lizard people. And one of the things that Anil Seth did that was fascinating was he created a project called the Dream Machine, where he took tens of thousands of people and gave them the same, 40,000 actually, hooked them up to a device that hit their closed eyes with these strobe lights and rhythmic soundtracks. And he started out doing this on the assumption that most people would have a somewhat similar experience. And what he discovered was that their experiences were wildly different. Sometimes even the same person on different days would see, one saw a maw of a wormhole where another saw a kaleidoscopic honeycomb. It's a simple input, but the individual visions of it, the strobing lights and the sound, were wildly different. And he said the variety for him of perceptual response was extraordinary, even for the same person. And one of the things he told me that to me was really impactful too was that bringing to light our inner diversity could be as transformational for society as recognition of our externally visible diversity has been. With neurodiversity in his mind, and he is neurodiverse, not a separate category, but a human feature. And And getting us back to psychiatry, it seems strange to me that the medical field that addresses thought essentially has not thought about it, where neuroscience really, really has. So I think that bringing these two things together, to me, is tremendously important, tremendously impactful. And I think, you know, if somebody even in med school had to take courses on perceptual diversity, on the kind of work that somebody like Anil Seth does, I think they would probably come into the profession feeling pretty different about it. So I have more I could say, but it's about 11:15. I wanted to stop and see if there are any questions, or if anybody would just like to share what you drew or your sense of what you drew. Just mine is, I find my mind is always, I can't think about one thing at a time. So when I try to draw how my mind works, it's like all these railroad tracks side by side. Sometimes the windows are kind of looking at each other, but they're also separate. Okay, so people are holding things up. Why don't you start and tell us what you're holding up, because it's a little hard to see. Do you want to mute?
Unmute. Yes. Okay. Yeah, it's hard to see. It's just an infinitely expanding array of concentric, randomly generated threads. Now,
oh wow.
Now, because I can't draw in 4 dimensions, this would be something that would be in constant motion.
Right. Roiling and moving. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and it doesn't even begin to do it justice. So it was just a fun sketch.
Yeah. Thank you, and thanks for sharing that. Anybody else? Were you holding one up?
Yeah, I tend to think in connections, and as the connections go, they often become more interwoven. And so when it's not necessarily that there are patterns, it's that they're separate and disconnected but connected pieces. So I go over history a lot as well.
That's beautiful. So yeah, so like when you really become aware of it, it's like this little pulsation at the intersection. Oh, that's very cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, anybody else want to share that, or does anybody have any questions?
Well,
I'd like to share. I don't know if I can actually get this in my camera.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see.
Right. I don't know if it's a very good drawing either.
I see some swishy lines. Yeah, okay. I think I see it. I think I can see it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this was hard to draw because I think I use kind of a kinesthetic sense for thinking. And it's almost like having a sense of another body that is kind of putting things together, or I mean, like the metaphor wrestling with ideas is like very apt. And this is a lot of kind of non-verbal thinking. It often involves objects in motion that are fitting together and sort of playing like that over and over again, kind of testing boundary cases to test out ideas. And then somehow it's like you arrive at something and now you have to like put into words. It's very hard.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. You know, one of the things that really interested me, a student of mine, who's just a wonderful poet, when we were having this conversation, said that she thinks of everything in terms of plants, and the words actually come last. Like there's plants, and she transplants, and she, like, often revision is a transplanting. But the words come at the very end, where I'm always, pretty verbal from the get-go. I think that's just so fascinating that some people are more image driven. Thank you for sharing that. That's fascinating. Did you have a question or something you want to share with us? I see a hand up. Maybe she didn't realize she put it up.
I did. Yeah, I was
There you go.
I was looking for how to unmute myself and where the camera was. I didn't get a chance to draw it, but I could explain some of that. I
Sure.
tend to have a lot of things backwards in terms of if school says go forth and do an essay, I go, okay, I will run around and research all I can on this topic and pull out the things I want and assemble them all. And then because they require an outline, I have to leave time at the end to do the outline because that requires summarization and I don't summarize. So it's going to take me twice as long to do the outline as it did to write the paper. And there was something else I didn't do.
So interesting.
But I haven't quite figured, so I don't summarize. So if you go off and say, what did you, how was the movie? I will tell you exactly what the movie was about, but it's not the summary that people want.
Yeah.
And, so, but I find that interesting because, that means for the essay, the thesis statement is the last thing I'll write because I have to be able to see everything before I can write it.
Oh, that's beautiful. I bet you do much better thinking than those for whom, I mean, the problem with biological psychiatry is that the thesis statement is all they've got. When you started studying things like the metabolites of serotonin, is there really any difference? All the evidence was contradictory to the thesis statement, but people still think that, and that it's all neurotransmitters. And not that, I mean, neurotransmitters are very important things, and obviously they affect our brains, but the evidence is more that how we feel changes them than that they change how we feel a priori. So good for you for doing that thesis statement last.
Yes. I've never figured out the part of science, though, that says that you must go forth and you know that you're looking for this, so you'll stop when you find it.
So you'll stop when you find it.
Exactly. Well, I saw a question about, bless you for the audiobook question. I have no control over that. It's the press would have to do an audiobook for A Mind Apart, and I would love it if they did, but it has not happened. And thank you all for who supported the book. I love that. I'm going to tell you a sort of another hero who I knew who he was, but I really learned a lot more about him when I wrote this book. A man named Loren Mosher. Is anyone familiar with Mosher or Soteria? He was a member of the American Psychiatric Association, although later in life he resigned. He said it had become the American Pharmacological Association and sarcastically said, but you won't have to change your initials. So quite a gutsy guy. He grew up very poor, put himself through school to become a psychiatrist, and ended up at one point heading the schizophrenia project at the National Institutes of Mental Health. So he's quite a high-ranking psychiatrist, and really started questioning the use of medication as heavily as it is used. And well, I'll tell you about Soteria first. So what he decided to do was set up a treatment that did not use medication. And he actually used, instead of putting people in a hospital, he used a house and went back to an 18th century treatment called the moral treatment, which was very successful with psychiatric patients. It was based on respect, on dialogue, on trying to understand people and meet them where they are. And so he did that with people in their first experience of psychosis, and he set it up as a double blind. So the Soteria patients were compared with patients put in a hospital, slammed with antipsychotics, and given the standard treatment. Unsurprisingly, the Soteria patients did better. And Mosher ended up being kind of drummed out of the profession because he was not anti-meds, and I'm not either, but he thought we are relying on them at the expense of people's humanity. And it's hard to disagree with that. But one of the things Mosher saw when he was heading the Schizophrenia Project was this very successful trial that crossed his desk where many, many people in a psychotic episode were treated with dialysis and they recovered and were great, much better than they were if they were given antipsychotics. And he thought, well, this makes no sense at all. I mean, how could doing this to your kidneys possibly help? But, he had to look into it. And what he discovered was that the guy who set it up would take people from these kind of snake pit hospitals, these awful wards where they were being held, put them in a dialysis unit, which was beautiful. It was quiet. Music was piped in. Whenever people were fed well, whenever the nurses came in, they wanted to sit and talk and see how their patients were doing. So there was tons of interaction. And that is what healed people. He said, I think his exact quote was, they were healed by being given a better life. And so that was the moment where he realized we are confusing forests and trees in a really big way here, and began Soteria. But it's kind of astonishing to me that it was easier to believe that you could attack the kidneys of someone having a mental episode, and that makes sense. But just looking at how they're treated didn't make sense. No one else had done that. So that's kind of astonishing to me, and sad, I guess, that that we can miss the mark so completely with how we deal with human beings. So I think that's all I've got for you. I think that while, there are critiques of the DSM out there, this is still how everyone is taught. I mean, they're still taught with the words of people like Hans Asperger and Emil Kraepelin, and with the ideas of people like that who were profoundly anti-humanistic. And so I'm just calling for maybe a little more dialogue with the folks over in neuroscience who are saying, hey, we've discovered this amazing thing. It's called consciousness. We don't know what causes it, but it's really pretty incredible. And I hope everybody can walk away giving your brain a little, or your mind a little inner love. And that's it. Does anybody have any final comments or thoughts, or want to share anything further about how you think or how your mind works? I think it's an interesting exercise, and I sometimes have people do it, but we're about, almost at 5 here, to write down how it would feel to really love your mind, to really appreciate your mind, to appreciate all that it can do, even when it can be, I mean, mental distress is painful. Obviously, I would never dismiss that. But when you think about all the elements it takes to even get to the point where things can be painful, it's pretty incredible that we're able to do this thing that we do and think. Oh, just saw this question was what Dorothea thought would happen with the war. Dorothea Buck died in 2019. She actually lived to be 103. And she was an activist to the end of her life. She was outside the German Bundestag because the Germans killed about 80 to 100,000 Germans and several 100,000 people throughout Europe because of neuropsychiatric conditions. And they were never declared victims of Nazism, so they were never given reparations. So she was out there screaming about it till the end. And what we know about her, we know from a book she wrote that's called On the Trail of the Morning Star. And the book does not detail the vision she saw of Hitler's war. She just used the word monstrous. And people were aware that Hitler was likely to start a war. They thought it would be very limited and very good for Germany, and, not what ended up happening. I think in 1936, it would have taken a lot to realize that. So. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Roger, do you have anything final you want to say?
No, I don't. Although you did want me to share my thought thingy.
Oh, please do. And I'm just quickly going to put my email into the chat. I'd
I
love to
saw people
continue
sharing it.
dialogue. So if
But
anybody
this
wants to write to
is
me, please do. Oh, Roger, I love it. That's so cool.
uh,
I like all the sort of serpentine imagery we're
yeah.
getting.
Well, what I was thinking, because when you asked that, I was thinking, well, I guess it depends, because there's some times where it can be like very linear, uh, and direct, straightforward. And then there's some times where it can be very convoluted, and um, up and down, side to side,
Yeah,
uh, and not always from A to B, but maybe from
sure.
A, and then a bunch of stuff happens, and then you find that you're sort of back at A, or at B, or maybe even somewhere else. So and there's
Yeah,
also lots of different overlay of thoughts too that can sort of happen at the same time,
yeah.
so
I have that, and I've talked to people who are like, that would be so horrible for me if I tried to think about more than one thing at a time. So as much as it feels natural to you, I mean, I have somebody very close to me who actually has an inner government. So everything is decided by the government. There's votes, there's presidents, there's like falls of the ruling party, but everything gets channeled through that. It's just we're so wildly disparate, and yet we try to come up with this model of neuronormativity that is kind of a joke, I think, based on what we're learning about the mind.
yeah, and I think that's I was reading something online about how when people become nostalgic about different decades, uh what decades do people generally reference? And I came across something that said, well, a lot of people like the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah,
And one of the reasons that was mentioned was that there was this sort of monocultural um, environment, and that all really changed with sort of the internet and
right.
having this globalization, where you can have like sort of different cultures. So you didn't have just a, you know very few dominant cultures. You had a lot of different kinds of cultures, and the subcultures were able to connect more. And I'm hoping that with that, we do the same things with our minds, and our thought processes.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Because
yeah.
if you grew up in a certain time and you think that this is the way it ought to be, and from your life experience, that, well, that not how I
Hmm.
was.
Hmm.
And if you didn't know that other people had that as well, then you might think, oh my goodness, what's going on? But to know, I think that
Yeah.
there's no sort of normal,
It's
I think it's
very
kind of liberating.
liberating.
Yeah.
It's very liberating. And a lot of people who find themselves seeing doctors, it's more about, I think this means there's something wrong than that there is something. I mean, you really have to train people to make that distinction. Would this bother you if you thought it was fine and it happened to everybody else? If the answer is no, you certainly shouldn't be, unless you're doing something socially destructive,
Mhm.
you shouldn't be doing anything about it. And I think it has a hand raised.
Yes, I did raise my hand. Thank you. I wanted to leave you with one thought, which I think you might appreciate now that I've attended this. Um, about 3 months ago, I met a new psychiatrist at the School of Medicine of, since I live. Um, anyhow, um, anytime I mentioned imagination to this psychiatrist, and he had clinical practice as a professor of psychiatry, he didn't know the difference between imagination and hallucination.
Oh, ouch.
So
Oh,
it gets
that hurts me to
better.
hear.
It gets
better.
better.
Oh dear.
Yeah, he accused me of being psychotic, told me I was schizophrenic. And that was before I even got into the topics of cognition and volition on top of that. And I read his clinical notes, which I downloaded from the online portal, in shock and horror. And so I immediately went to the American Psychiatric Association, actually the State Psychiatric Licensing Board, in order to turn him in for malpractice. And to my horror, what I found out there was that if you file a formal complaint against a psychologist or psychiatrist, all of your psychiatric records become public record.
Oh my lord.
And so the system's rigged.
That's so rigged.
It's rigged, so you're not going to want to do it. And if you do
Yeah.
do it, then they can discredit you by saying, well, you see, our notes say that this person is sick, so you can't take anything they say seriously. Oh, and by
Yeah.
the way, this is public record now.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and several of you have sort of posted.
Mention the new eugenics, and we really are very much heading that way.
Not heading.
So, yeah, and that is absolutely appalling.
No,
I've learned that a psychiatrist.
I saw in Bellingham, where I used to live, had 600 patients because she bragged about it to me.
Oh, sure.
That's like
4 times the professional. I mean, there is a professional standard, and it's that you stay between 1 and 200. So this is really appalling. You cannot take decent care of 600 people.
Well, isn't that the same woman who started the pseudo-psychiatric porn site called Only Patients?
It's not, but it probably could be.
I just made that up.
Only patients. Oh my
But
lord.
I do want to add that after raising holy hell, threatening to sue the school, of which I have the financial means to do, they replaced her with a NPC, which is a nurse practitioner of psychiatry,
Right.
who was so good, she
Yeah.
eclipsed every bad psychiatrist I had for the preceding 58 years.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
all is well.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that. But, I think that it's the psychiatrist whose training it's Kraepelinian. It's this Kraepelinian stuff.
That you really have to. I mean.
I have several very good friends who are psychiatrists, and I've had several that were just wonderful humans. But you have to unlearn a lot to bring any humanity to the process. You have to unlearn the idea that you're just dealing with the broken brain, which is such a terrible metaphor. And if people you're seeing, if their assumption is that your brain is likely to be broken, it's hard to have a good relationship, So, well, I'm so glad though that you ended up with somebody good, and I should let you all go, but I gave you my email for a reason. I love to continue dialogue, and so feel free to use it, and maybe I'll see you here again at CASY. And thanks, Roger.
Well, thank you so much, Suzanne. Again, another so enlightening. I myself, as a psychiatrist, usually get to view only a few limited opinions, and experiences and sides of this human experience. And it's always refreshing to hear you talk. So thank you very much.
Always great to be here, Casey. This is where things are going the right direction. So hang on to that too. Bye, y'all.